Hi, welcome to episode 2 of Maritime Matters. I'm Captain Morgan Dawicki, and again, I have here with me President Eric Dawicki of the Northeast Maritime Institute.
Hey, Morgan.
What's going on? Hey. So we have a topic we'd like to discuss today, and that's adaptability. A lot of crazy things going on, certainly in the world, and I think one thing we've had to observe over the past few weeks is, this concept of being able to adapt to ambiguous times and things that are going on. You just don't know what the right thing to do is, but you go at it and you attack it and you do your best, and you just got to be courageous. You got to be a bit courageous. And so I think it's a topic we'd like to discuss. Certainly when we bring kids in for sail training, that's sort of the core of our program is adaptability. And it's teaching people to overcome their fears and be able to work outside their comfort zone. And I think a lot of our industry is working outside your comfort zone. You got to be able to fare a storm, so to speak, and get through the rough waves and the rough times. And I think we're doing well, and it's been exciting. It's been nerve-wracking, but I think people are adapting and they're overcoming. So what I'd like to do today is kind of talk about current events, but compare them to sort of your experiences at sea. We'll take a look at sort of how the industry is reacting. Yesterday we had some crazy news with the oil industry, and I think shedding some light on how companies are reacting to that and sort of overcoming some of those obstacles is something people probably want to hear about. So why don't we kind of jump right into that topic to start? And so to give people some background, yesterday the oil futures prices dropped pretty heavily due to the lack of oil demand globally, which is pretty significant. It's a little bit scary, but tell us about sort of what companies are going to be doing to react, how they're going to be maintaining jobs and really overcoming the short term in order to sustain themselves for the long term.
Sure. So I think in the sense of oil, the demand certainly dropped because of COVID-19. There's less automobiles on the roads. There's less need for energy. That's kind of insignificant as much as there was overproduction.
Yep.
Right? So you have this war between Russia and Saudi Arabia in trying to outmaneuver one another and really force a price war.
Yep.
And in fact, it blew up on them.
Yep.
So the rest of the world has to deal with it. But, as I said to you yesterday, there is a new world order.
Yep.
There's no question about it. We are a family that grew up in the oil industry for generations and generations. It started here in Fairhaven with Standard Oil. We absolutely know that there is a new world order taking place. Oil production has been very vital for our global economy. And this shift is going to be huge. It's going to be immense. And we're going to have to create a whole new global economy. And what is that going to be? Is that going to be in the services industry? Is it tourism? Is it education, quite frankly? Is it research and development for new technologies? We don't know yet. We really don't know yet. So how does this affect the maritime industry? And we don't know yet.
Right.
So the ability to adapt to ambiguity is key. And some of the best adaptations to industrial economies has been incurred by the maritime sector, right? So the maritime industry really is one of these brilliant industries that adapts, and they shape up and they figure out where they're going to head. So if you look at the offshore supply industry, for example, they supply the drilling rigs and they go out and support. Well, they're going to have to adapt, right? So where are they going to adapt to? They're going to adapt towards offshore wind,
right,
for example. They're going to adapt their vessels so they can go ahead and build wind terminals and wind farms offshore. That's one of the things we're going to have to do. With that, we are going to look at this homogenized industry that not only are we providing energy, but I think food is going to be one of the critical factors in the future of maritime operations. Food is going to be essential, and clean food, and food that is sustainable and not ruining nature in the sense. Okay, so where does food go? You've certainly got aquaculture and sustainable aquaculture, but you are also going to be looking at proteins such as shellfish, and in fact, fish can be grown at sea. There's been strides made with certainly the salmon industry, but that's been controversial. But there's even the opportunity to grow Atlantic cod at sea in these new vessels, and it's pretty fascinating when you see some of the technologies that are being created to create fisheries. But the other thing is we're dealing with that the world has to tackle as not only the maritime industry, but the world as a whole is ocean acidification, global warming, and these huge algae plumes that are being developed, certainly in the Gulf of Mexico, certainly in parts of the Atlantic, in the Pacific, the garbage patches. We're going to have to clean up our waters, right? So this is going to be a major part of growth opportunity in the maritime sector, with kind of forward-thinking peoples in how they are going to commercialize and sustain these opportunities. So when I was a kid growing up, it was, I grew up on tankers. 85% of my career was LNG tankers. I think LNG tankers are going to play a pretty solid role over the next probably decade or two, because it is a cleaner fuel than, say, the petrochemicals that are being used in today's world as we know it. That has to change overnight. We're seeing this with the COVID-19 pandemic, that because of staying at home, oh my God, the earth is clean.
Right.
People can breathe. We are seeing a global or a sustainability within nature that we haven't seen in 50 years. People wake up. We need to really identify that in a way that is cogent to the well-being of our children and our grandchildren. So how do we adapt? We look at these other opportunities in a way that will be configured cleanly. Mitigate travel, mitigate airplanes traveling back and forth. Airplanes is another thing. I think people are going to be moving across the ocean on ships again. I really do. If we can figure out how to scrub the air on passenger liners, you're going to see more and more travel overseas on ships. I believe that. The planes are killing our planet. That's just a cold, hard fact. Airplanes are killing the planet. Sending up satellites is killing our planet. There is more CO2 emitted on a satellite launch than an airplane for a whole year of operation. So the fact of the matter is we've got to be forward-thinking and creative. And people in the maritime sector do that. Mm-hmm. And it's the coolest thing. We've adapted here at Northeast Maritime Institute by developing online training, online simulation, where we can actually conduct assessments. We in a closely related company, have designed an examination monitoring software where, for the first time in the U.S., federal oversight of examinations can be done online. Mm-hmm. That's pretty exciting. And so here we are again. We're saving fuel. We're saving the earth because we're not emitting so much CO2. And we're doing all the right things. We're all going to have to adapt in our personal lives. And it's really a fascinating time. While it's scary for most, and the economy is really a mess right now, mm-hmm. and it's going to be a mess for a while. But those one thing I always tell people about the economy is, hey guys, money doesn't disappear.
Right.
It just doesn't disappear into the thin air. money is still out there. It's figuring out where it is and how to get it circulated, and not in the so radical concepts as trickle down. Trickle down doesn't work. We all know that. We've got to distribute wealth in a much more equal way. We have to create wealth distribution with fair and equitable equilibrium, right? So that the whole of society actually gets to function and perform. So I think one of the most fascinating industries to promulgate growth and enhancement of certainly economy is the maritime sector. The maritime sector had a lot to do with banking years ago. Now it's all done through private equity and non-traditional ventures. But man, banks used to lend towards steel, ships. And that was kind of a cool thing that they would do that, because it played a major role in the financial portfolios of major banks. When I was a kid, Citibank was a major player in lending. It used to be called the Chemical Bank of New York, actually. They would finance all the ships that were being built. You're going to see some of that stuff happening again. You're going to see some of that stuff rebirthing itself conceptually. So it's exciting, and fear not. Roll up your sleeves, go to work. Just do what you have to do. All we need to have to sustain ourselves is a roof over our head and a little bit of food in our bellies. Then we need to go to work and figure out how are we going to help ourselves, help others. And I think if we do that as a collective society, if we do that as a maritime or a waterborne society, we're going to make some great collective advancements for the sake of humanity. And this industry has a great role to play.
I think what's fascinating is we're kind of returning to your world a little bit with LNG, at least in the short term. So this adaptability, we have technologies or sort of ideas and concepts that you were working with 25 years ago that are suddenly reemerging. So I think LNG is sort of exposing itself as at least a transition fuel, as you said, for the next 2 decades. And people are already going to be able to convert existing tankers for LNG, and they're going to be able to convert some of their existing assets, which is going to be great, I think, because LNG is producing 30% less emissions, which is going to help the earth breathe a little bit better. I think we're going to, in the near term, we're going to return back, and people are going to be demanding oil, but how do we reduce those emissions in the short term? And I think that's a great direction that we're heading, right? We want to get away from those CO2 emissions. So maybe tell us about the difference between LNG then versus LNG now.
Oh, goodness. LNG then was taboo. Nobody wanted to work on an LNG tanker because if it exploded, it had the candle power of 10 hydrogen bombs. And people were deathly afraid of LNG tankers. And in fact, they are the safest commercial vessels on the water. And the reason is because they were held to such high technical standards in ship construction and oversight and vetting processes. Only the best of the best got to work on the LNG tankers, and it was the no nonsense people. And we really, when I look back at it as a kid getting allowed to go work on an LNG tanker, I had no idea what an opportunity that was, and it was a job, and got there, and man, I fell in love with it. I just fell in love with the whole concept of LNG. In my mind, clean fuel, and not as clean as it should be, but certainly cleaner than everything else. And it was a great way to earn a living. And when I say a clean fuel, not only for the globe, but for the mariners that work on board these vessels. When I worked on the oil tankers, you'd have to crawl in the holds, and you would Butterworth, which is cleaning the tanks and muck those tanks and wear your respirators and go down. It was the most god-awful work you could imagine. And I started my career as a rating, or if people don't understand it in military concepts, it's enlisted, right? So you're just a grunt. You go down there and you do the grunt work, and which was also one of the best forms of education that I've ever had. When I got to the LNG tankers, oh my God, there was none of that grunt work. It was all clean work. There was chipping and painting of the ship, of course. But man, you were working with clean fuels. You were using your head. You were taking readings and gauging readings and reporting readings. And, the cargo officer took those readings and did his job by loading or discharging the vessel based on the data that was coming in. And it was all analog at the time. There was no digital data.
Yeah.
So basically, that analog data had to enroll the human element in order to operate a vessel in a safe, efficient, and cost-effective manner. And so, how is it today? People understand that it is a clean and safe operation. We still have to ensure, the maritime administrations that register these vessels, they need to make darn well sure that these vessels are operating at the highest standards of all. It is imperative that we never loosen the grip on those high standards, because it could be dangerous.
Right.
But all in all, I think we're going to see more. I think we're going to see more ships using LNG as fuel, which is a good thing. Much more efficient. You'll see vessels lasting longer, by the way.
Yep.
There's not as much corrosion on the engines. It's a clean fuel. So I think that's the way to go for the next 10 or 20 years. Ultimately, we're going to see electric motors. I just know it in my heart of hearts. I think we're going to figure that piece out. Even if it's turbo electric, using LNG as fuel, we're going to see that. And I just believe that if anybody is going to adapt, it's this industry.
Right.
And I think we're going to see that in a very righteous way.
Yeah, I think we're already seeing solutions just a couple months into these sort of ambiguous times, these uncertain times. And it really is impressive. Sort of getting exposed to the inner workings of the industry the past few years. I've had the chance to work here and really get to know how significant it is. I think I've grown up always surrounded by it and being on the water, but to really get to know the people and how brilliant they are, to get to see the policy at the highest levels. I just can't think of another industry that on a day-to-day, a week-to-week basis has solutions at hand and just such well-informed and decisive people. Can you recall a time where either working on the water or just the past 25 years where there were ambiguous times in the maritime industry at this scale, or not at this scale, but I'll say, I guess news wasn't as quick back then, so how would you know all the time what was going on? But we're going through a time where vessels are sort of having to lay up, or not lay up, but they're storing offshore, and things are a little slow right now, so to speak. Where are things going to go in the next couple months, do you think?
Honestly, I think the tankers are all going to be used as storage facilities. With oil at negative $40 a barrel yesterday, people are basically being paid to store oil on tankers. There's got to be a reason for that.
Right.
And I think what will happen is that we will have a big burp in the offshore supply sector. We've been expecting that anyway.
Okay.
for decades. We've been seeing these anomalies occur, and while there's growth opportunities in some regions,
so kind of like a market correction.
It is a market correction, but we've never seen such a large or vast market correction. We went through the oil embargo in 1976, which everybody said there was no oil. My dad personally, your grandfather, sat in a tanker offshore of New York City for 3 months with a tanker full of oil. Mm-hmm. That was a market correction, yep. Right? And I'm not so sure it wasn't a forced market correction.
Gotcha.
Matter of fact, I know it was. But, you know, honestly, I know as a result of what we are seeing the Earth doing right now, it's going to be insane if we don't start to change how we live, mm-hmm. in what our personal needs are. We've been awfully spoiled,
right?
And you know, I'm the last year of the baby boomer, right? And I will tell you this much: the baby boomers really screwed this world up. You know, our grandparents or our parents' generation, the greatest generation in the history of the United States, in fact. You know, they birthed a generation that blew it all. And I'm sorry for you guys and your children, but I think you're smarter than us, and I think you guys will fix this. And we need a culture and a society that is more humanitarian in spirit and in action, right. than we have with the I, me, mine generation.
Right.
We think to change
this sort of course of events. I think it's forced a lot of people to kind of accept what's going on in the world around us, and sort of there's been a lot of denial, but I think now there's a lot of acceptance. And I think looking at the amount of people who have stepped back and decided to say, okay, I am going to isolate, I am going to quarantine for the sake of others, I think that's pretty uplifting, to be honest. I think it restores a lot of faith in humanity as a collective. And there's a very small sliver minority who are not sort of accepting of what's going on. And that's okay, that's always going to happen. But I think as a large majority, Americans at the very least are eager to change and are eager to accept that, okay, we can't keep going like this. We need to make the changes, we need to adapt, we need to overcome. And I honestly think they're looking for direction, or they're going to be looking for direction. So hopefully in a few months, we're going to kind of be able to know where we're at and the directions we need to take. And so I think being in the maritime industry is unique in that we know how to adapt. We're used to this. And now it's looking at sort of the rest of the economy as a whole and saying, okay, are you guys ready to adapt? Are you guys ready to overcome this?
Well, here's the interesting thing, right? We just discovered that, you know, we've got this concept of nationalism and globalism, and yet we really haven't had a taste of real globalism. Mm-hmm. You know, we've had nations that have played significant roles in trade and commerce, but there hasn't been an equilibrium in production and distribution around the world. Right? So I think what we're going to discover, and this is going to benefit the maritime sector greatly, and I mean vastly, is we're going to discover that we must create a trade equilibrium that actually we realize production in not just one country or one part of the world.
Right.
It's going to have to be in all parts of the world. And that's to protect the environment, and that's going to be to protect the economy, mm-hmm. and that's going to be to protect distribution practices. And we are going to see an increased representation of manufacturing in all parts of the world, and this is my prediction. I don't know this for a fact, but I see it. I see it as clear as day.
Right.
We are going to see places that have not participated in manufacturing historically start to engage in that, and that can happen anywhere, right? We've created that. We created that disproportionate support in other regions of the world where we became heavily dependent on one region or one nation, as a matter of fact, to produce all of our goods and products. That blew up in our face recently. Right? So we're going to start to see this spread, and that's when capitalism works, and that's when democracy works, and that's when opportunities work for all. And we have this fear mongering about immigration. There's no need for immigration anymore if we create wealth distribution on a global level. And you're going to start to have to see less nationalism and more support for globalism if we all share this earth. As I've said, and as we've produced a documentary, the ocean knows no borders. The ocean does not know any borders. The fish don't know any borders, right? Whales don't know any borders. So the reality is, if we start to think in those terms, our industry, maybe I'm being selfish, but our industry grows tenfold, distributing and delivering goods and services. I say get rid of the mega tankers or the mega container ships. That's bad for the global economy. I'm sorry. That's just bad stuff. Get back down to the Handymax size vessels. Redistribute. Have more distribution points. You're going to see our industry grow. And I think we're going to have to be forced to do that in order to have a sustainable environment globally. Again, using alternative fuels. That's the key.
Yeah, you want a diverse trade portfolio. Global trade is what has given us this quality of life, this amount of wealth. It would be naive to abandon those concepts and say blame that for our undoing. I think the situation we're in, like you said, we kind of depended on too few trading partners, if anything. So it's really all we're doing is diversifying. We're thinking more regionally, and I think that's the way we wanted to head anyways. I think that's where we were heading. I think on a policy level, at least, at the end of the last administration, they were really working towards increasing trade with other ASEAN countries, is what the acronym is. So I think we were kind of heading in that direction. And I think it makes sense, but yeah, here we are adapting. So we're in a time where we're going to be forced to maybe increase the speed at which we're making those changes. So I think it's interesting.
Yeah, no, we are going to have to hasten the process, and we've got to kind of look at the current state of affairs, and we got to make immediate change.
Right.
What we have today in the last 3 years, it just isn't working.
Right.
And it's only working for a very select few, and that's not sustainable.
Right.
And we need to be more responsible as a society, and again, not just as an American society, but as a shipping society, as a global trading society. And from the standpoint of humanitarianism, if we are going to save our earth, save our oceans, we need to do things in a much more responsible and equitable manner. And I think we all win as a result.
I think we'll see those changes over the next few months. And I think we're in crisis management mode as a society. Across the globe, everyone is. It's just what's going on and what everybody's experiencing. But I think in a couple months, we'll start seeing changes. We'll start seeing things move rapidly. And I think, in a sense, people should be excited almost. And because I think the power is in the people's hands to demand change, to want change, to seek change. We need to hold everyone accountable, hold each other accountable going forward. And really, as a collective we, as you're saying, look for the common betterment of society, for increasing opportunities, for adapting what we have now to new opportunities, refocusing our energies. But I think the solutions are there, and crises demand solutions, and we're getting there.
Yeah.
So.
No, it's kind of the brilliance of where we got to grow up in the U.S. Now, it hasn't been so pretty lately, right? And pretty lately meaning the last maybe 20 years, right? We've kind of lost our focus as an equitable society, but you can feel the change, and people have had enough of kind of the crazy stuff, right? And the fact that we are not seen globally as an equitable partner anymore, that has to change, and we have to re-engage with a sense of humility, and I think we can do that. I think we've seen such radical events over the last several years that the collective we, as you put it, we've had enough, and we want to engage in global trade and globalism and really having an equitable position in this world and be seen as equitable trading partners. We're going to do that. I know that. The bottom line is we definitely know when change is occurring. And man, I've never felt such a rumble than I'm feeling right now in our own domestic arena. And people just want to make sure that their children and their grandchildren are going to be safe. That's all. That's all people want, and that's all we need, as a matter of fact. So I see this, and again, I'm so excited. I really am. With every crisis, there's several opportunities that are birthed out of crisis. These are those times for opportunity, and again, if we do it with purity of heart, we'll have success.
Cool. Well, thank you again for joining me and doing this Maritime Matters podcast. That's it for episode 2. Keep tuning in every Wednesday. We're going to have future episodes. If there's a subject you would like us to cover, please send us a message on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, anywhere you can find us. Send in some suggestions, things you'd like us to discuss. Eric brings a lot of experience from the maritime field, and it's fun to sit down and chat with you and get your perspective. You've been through some familiar and similar things, so having that expertise is pretty interesting for me to hear. And selfishly, it's getting to hear things I haven't heard before. So it's
just
fun.
Real quick, I've said this to students that I've taught. I say this I've even said it in front of Congress. No such thing as an expert.
Yep.
There's just experience, right? So,
but it is fun to hear, and thank you for joining us on this subject of adapting to ambiguity. So,
thank you all.